only on C-SPAN 2.
Today, the commission investigating the September 11th terrorist attacks focused on intelligence gathering and aviation security before and after the attacks. Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta testified, and the commission is chaired by former New Jersey Governor Thomas Kean. This portion's about 2 hours and 40 minutes.
Yesterday, the commission received testimony from members of Congress, from expert witnesses about the U.S. civil aviation security system as it operated in the period leading up to September 11th, 2001. Today we move forward. The first look at the 9/11 hijackings themselves and the security system's performance of that day. Our final panelist will then address the changes which have been made in aviation security since 9/11 and also options for further improvements in the current system. Before we proceed further, I want the record to be made very clear that the Commission is intensely aware of any number of reports indicating failures outside the area of the aviation security system. These would include failures in intelligence, law enforcement, and border security, which may have played a major part in making 9/11 possible. The Commission has a statutory mandate and will be examining those areas as well. They may even be the subject of future hearings. Our focus today, however, is the field of civil aviation. With today's first, with that start, we pick up the story of the hijackings on September 11th itself. How did the civil aviation system security operate that day with respect to the 19 hijackers? What weapons and tactics did they employ to defeat the system? Why couldn't we stop them? Or at least in the 3 out of 4 cases that reached their target, prevent the successful completion of their mission. This hearing record will remain open for 14 additional calendar days for anybody of the witnesses who want to submit additional material and perhaps for the Commission to send follow-up questions. We are very pleased with the group of witnesses who are here today, particularly our first witness. And we're going to hear from the Secretary of Transportation, a long record of public service in the United States Congress, Secretary Mineta.
Thank you very much, Chairman Kane, Vice Chairman Hamilton, and distinguished members of the Commission for this opportunity to testify before you. I want to compliment the Commission on its intention to collect and provide the information on the circumstances surrounding the tragedies of September 11th, 2001. I would like to provide the Commission with a brief account of what happened on September 11th, 2001. I believe I can be most helpful to this Commission by providing information in which I have personal knowledge and a few observations from my perspective as Secretary of Transportation. There are many events that occurred on September 11th that I do not have personal knowledge of, though I have learned about them in subsequent investigations and reports. I know this Commission will be speaking to the same agencies and individuals that provided me with that information, so I will let the Commission collect that information from those primary sources. However, I do want to comment on what I believe is an important responsibility of this Commission, and that is to add to the understanding of the American people about what we call terrorism and the threat that it poses. I have seen terrorism in several forms and from several vantage points over the years. As an intelligence officer in the United States Army during the era of the Korean conflict, and in Congress as one of the early members of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Like a mutating virus, I have seen terrorism take different form over the years in an effort to defeat the safeguards that have been devised to protect against it. And I believe it is critical to recognize this important truth about terrorism. The threat of terrorism is constant, But the nature of that threat changes because to be successful, terrorism must continually change how it operates. On Tuesday morning, September 11th, 2001, I was meeting with the Belgian transport minister in my conference room adjacent to my office discussing aviation issues. Because of the agenda, FAA Administrator Jane Garvey was also in attendance. A little after 8:45 a.m., my Chief of Staff, John Flaherty, interrupted the meeting. He asked Administrator Garvey and me to step into my office, where he told me that news agencies were reporting that some type of aircraft had flown into one of the towers of New York's World Trade Center. Information was preliminary, so we did not know what kind of aircraft, nor whether or not it was intentional. Jane Garvey immediately went to a telephone and contacted the FAA Operations Center. I asked to be kept informed of any developments and returned to the conference room to explain to the Belgian Prime Minister that our meeting might have to be postponed. In an incident involving a major crash of any type, the Office of the Secretary goes into a major information gathering response. It contacts the modal administration overseeing whatever mode of transportation is involved in the incident. It monitors press reports, contacts additional personnel to accommodate the surge in operations, and centralizes the information for me through the Chief of Staff. In major incidents, it will follow a protocol of notification that includes the White House and other agencies involved in the incident. These activities, albeit in the nascent stage of information gathering, took place in these initial minutes. A few minutes after my return to the conference room, my Chief of Staff again asked me to step back into my office. He then told me that the aircraft was a commercial aircraft and that the FAA had received an unconfirmed report that a hijacking of an American Airlines flight had occurred. While Mr. Flaherty was briefing me, I watched as a large commercial jet flew into the second tower of the World Trade Center. At this point, things began to happen quickly. I once more returned to the conference room and informed the minister of what had happened and ended the meeting. I received a telephone call from the CEO of United Airlines, Jack Goodman, telling me that one of United's flights was missing. I then called Don Carty, the CEO of American Airlines, and asked him to see if American Airlines could account for all of its aircraft. Mr. Flaherty reported to me that Jane Garvey had phoned to report that the CEO of Delta Airlines had called the FAA and said it could not yet account for all of its aircraft. During this time, my office activated the Department of Transportation's Crisis Management Center, which was located on the 8th floor at that time of the Department of Transportation headquarters, and provides for senior DOT personnel to conduct surge operations in a coordinated manner. By this time, my office had contacted the White House. A brief moment later, the White House called my Chief of Staff and asked if I could come to the White House and operate from that location. I decided that given the nature of the attack and the request, that I should be at the White House directly providing the President and the Vice President with information. When I got to the White House, it was being evacuated. I met briefly with Richard Clark, a National Security Council staff member who had no new information. Then the Secret Service escorted me down to the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, otherwise known as the PEOC. I established contact on two lines, one with my Chief of Staff at the Department of Transportation, and the second with Monty Belger, the acting Deputy Administrator of the FAA, and Jane Garvey, both of whom were in the FAA Operations Center. And as the minutes passed, the developing picture from air traffic control towers and radar screens became increasingly more alarming. Some aircraft could not be contacted. While on a normal day, that may be just a communications snafu, we were faced with trying to quickly sort out minor problems from significant threats. We did not know how many more attacks might be in progress. The FAA began to restrict air travel in the Northeast United States by a combination of actions, which included sterilizing airspace in certain regions and at various airports, and ultimately a nationwide ground stop of all aircraft for all locations, regardless of destination. Within a few minutes, American Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon. At this time, as we discussed the situation with the North American Aerospace Defense Commander and his staff, we considered implementing an emergency system of coordinated air traffic management to allow maximum use for defensive activities. It was clear that we had to clear the airspace as soon as possible to stop any further attacks and ensure domestic airspace was available for emergency and defensive use. And so at approximately 9:45 a.m., less than 1 hour after I had first been notified of an airplane crash in New York, I gave the FAA the final order for all civil aircraft to land at the nearest airport as soon as possible. It was the first shutdown of civil aviation in the history of the United States. Within minutes, air traffic controllers throughout the nation had directed 700 domestic and international flights to emergency but safe landings. Within another 50 minutes, air traffic controllers, working with skilled flight crews, made sure another 2,800 airplanes returned safely to the ground. By shortly after noon, less than 4 hours after the first attack, U.S. airspace was empty of all aircraft except military and medical traffic. A total of approximately 4,500 aircraft were landed without incident and highly stressful conditions. Additionally, all international inbound flights were diverted from U.S. airspace and U.S. airports. Unfortunately, during this time, we also learned that United Flight 93 crashed in Stony Creek Township, Pennsylvania. As America knows, but it is important to keep repeating, that aircraft never reached the terrorist target due to the heroic actions taken by the passengers and crews on United Flight 93. The question has been asked whether or not there is evidence that other hijackings and attacks were prevented by the actions that were taken that day. There are classified reports, media reports, and investigative documents that indicate that other attacks may have been planned. but the evidence on this question is speculative at best, and I do not believe anyone can assert that other attacks were thwarted on that day unless he or she is the one who either planned the attack or planned to carry it out. I also want to tell the Commission that although the focus of this Commission's interest is on the airplane crashes on September 11th, as Secretary of the United States Coast Guard, I was involved that day in the mass evacuation of more than 350,000 people from Manhattan. In addition to the largest maritime evacuation conducted in the history of the United States, our department's agencies were working with the various New York authorities on the devastating infrastructure damage suffered there. Over the next few days, our department spent hours working with various state, local, and federal agencies to reopen roads, tunnels, bridges, harbors, and railroads while getting essential relief supplies into the area. I have talked about the staff at the Department of Transportation and how proud I am of how they responded on September 11th and in the days and the months afterward. I also want to remark on the families, friends, the victims of that tragic day, and those who were injured physically and emotionally. I share in much of their grief and heartache, although I can never experience the depth of it. The consequences of September 11th affected all of America, but the greatest effect was on these people. And I have spent a great deal of physical and emotional effort this past year trying to make sure that what happened on that day does not happen again. We must do everything we can to try and prevent other Americans from enduring the pain that these families and friends have suffered. But in that work, we must never forget those families and that pain and anguish. I know I don't. It helps me in the work I continue to do. They are in my thoughts and prayers. Thank you very much.